One afternoon, the most powerful man in the world walked up to someone who owned almost nothing and offered him anything he wanted. Gold, land, a place in his court, anything. The man just asked him to move. He was blocking the sunlight. That's not a joke. That actually happened, or at least, that's the story that survived for over 2,000 years. And by the end of this video, I want you to understand exactly why a man with nothing felt he had more than a man who owned nearly everything. His name was Diogenes, and to understand what just happened in that story, we have to go back to before he met any king. We have to start with a jar. You've probably heard he lived in a barrel. That's actually a myth that stuck. What he really lived in was a large ceramic storage jar, the kind used to hold wine or grain, big enough for one man to lie down in. Wooden barrels barely existed yet in his time. Later writers changed the detail, and it's the version that survived. But the jar is the true one, and it matters because it's even less comfortable than a barrel would have been. He set it up in the middle of Athens, not in some forest, away from judgment. Right in the marketplace, where merchants argued over prices and citizens walked past on their way to decide the fate of their city. Try this for a second. Picture your own home disappearing tonight. Not stolen, not destroyed, just quietly gone painlessly along with everything in it. Now notice what you're actually afraid of losing. Is it warmth? Is it shelter? Or is it something harder to name? Maybe it's the feeling of having a place. A thing that says, this much at least is mine. The jar gave him warmth and shelter. It gave him almost nothing else. And that's the detail that unsettles people more than his poverty does. Not that he had so little, but that he didn't seem to need the place part at all. So here's where this video actually starts. What do we actually need? The story goes that Diogenes once owned almost nothing: a cloak, a staff, a bag, and a wooden cup for water. One day he saw a boy drinking from a stream with nothing but his own hands cupped together. Diogenes is said to have thrown his cup away on the spot. It sounds like a lesson about poverty. It probably isn't. Every object carries a small tax. You think about it, you protect it, you replace it eventually. The cup wasn't heavy, but a life with zero of those small taxes is a very different life than one with even a few. Here's the harder question underneath it, though. If that's true, if fewer things really does mean a lighter mind, then why does almost no one who can own more choose to own less? Either the lesson is wrong, or something in us resists lightness even when we can clearly see its appeal. Maybe both are half true. Wanting less is easy to admire and hard to actually want. What do we need, and what have we simply learned to carry? The Greek word is nomos, pronounced nomos. It means convention. The things a society simply agrees are true. Against it, Diogenes set physis, pronounced phusis. It means nature, what a person actually requires, with no one's opinion attached. One more experiment. Imagine that everyone alive quietly forgot to notice anything you own: your house, your job title, the phone in your hand. No one impressed, no one ranking, no one watching. What would you still want once no one was watching you want it? Probably food, shelter, people you love for their own sake, not for what having them implies about you. And if that's close to true, then much of an ordinary life, the upgrading, the comparing, the quiet dread of falling behind, was never really about need. It was about being seen to have enough. But don't rush past the harder part. If all of that really is just a story, why does losing it still hurt like something real? Losing status doesn't just wound your image. It can feel like losing ground under your feet. Maybe it's because a story, repeated by everyone for your whole life, stops feeling like a story. It becomes the floor you stand on. Diogenes seemed to think you could see through that floor and keep standing anyway. Whether anyone fully manages that, whether anyone truly stops needing to matter to somebody, is worth doubting, even while admiring the attempt. What do we need, and what have we only been taught to fear losing? Remember how this video started. The most powerful man alive, standing in front of a man who owned nothing, offering him anything at all. Gold, land, a place in his court, and getting asked instead to simply move out of the sunlight. That was Alexander the Great. And now that you know what the jar actually meant, and what the cup meant, and what nomos and fizzies meant to him, it's worth going back to that moment and actually sitting in it instead of just laughing at it. Alexander had built his entire sense of self on being able to take almost anything he wanted. And the one thing Diogenes wouldn't let him take wasn't gold or land. It was something that was never anyone's to give in the first place. It wasn't because Diogenes owned the sun. It was because no one did. Now turn the question on yourself, not on either of them. If someone offered you everything Alexander offered right now today, is there anything you'd ask them to leave alone instead? Something no purchase could touch? And if the answer comes slowly, that might be worth noticing too. What do we need, and what would we refuse even a king to take? Here's the part this video won't resolve. It's just going to leave it in the room with you. Diogenes didn't live his simplicity quietly, off in some forest. He lived it in the busiest part of the busiest city he could find, in plain view of the very people whose values he claimed to be done with. A hermit needs no audience to be simple. Diogenes seemed to need one. So gently, if a person needs to be seen rejecting the crowd's approval, have they actually stopped needing the crowd? Or have they traded one dependence for a quieter one? Status through possessions, swapped for identity through being watched refusing them. Push it one turn further and point it at yourself instead of him. Think of a time you tried to want less, simplified something, decluttered, dropped out of some race for a while. Was any part of that for someone else to notice? Not shame, just an honest look. Maybe both things can be true in the same person at once. Maybe that's simply what it looks like to be human while trying to want less. What do we need, and how much of what looks like freedom is still performed for somebody? Diogenes is believed to have written a work called The Republic. It hasn't survived. Nothing of it remains in his own words. What we know comes secondhand, through later writers describing ideas associated with him and the Cynic tradition he founded, apparently echoed later in Zeno of Citium's own Republic. Historians disagree about how much of it can be confidently traced back to Diogenes at all, so treat this as reported tradition, not settled fact. One idea attached to that tradition is this, that rejecting private ownership might extend even to family, that children could belong to a community rather than to one household, one bloodline, one father. We don't know what Diogenes felt privately about children or attachment. No record says. It would be dishonest to invent an answer. But the question underneath is fair to ask of the philosophy itself, not of the man. If a whole way of living is built on the idea that ownership creates suffering, where does that logic stop? At cups and cloaks? Or does it eventually have to ask whether loving someone as yours is its own kind of holding on? That's not a comfortable question. It may not have a comfortable answer. What do we need, and can what we love ever really be excluded from the answer? Diogenes wasn't the only one to land here. Centuries later, thousands of miles away, early Buddhist teaching arrived at something strikingly similar. That craving, not scarcity, is the root of suffering. Certain threads in Hindu philosophy pointed the same direction. That attachment, not lack, disturbs a person's peace. These traditions didn't know of each other when they began, and yet more than one civilization, independently, arrived at the same quiet suspicion, that wanting less might create more peace than having more ever could. Here's the wrinkle worth sitting with, though. It's the sharpest turn in this whole video. Can the rejection of desire become a desire of its own, a craving to be free of craving? If a person is proud of how little they want, have they simply found a new thing to want? Maybe this video won't resolve that either. Some questions are more useful left open than closed. What do we need, or is even the wanting of nothing still, quietly, a want? So what do we actually need? Maybe less than convention insists. Maybe not nothing. He still ate. He still needed a city to live inside of. He still, apparently, needed to be witnessed. Total independence from other people was never really available to him, or to anyone, including you. But somewhere between owning everything and owning nothing, there might be a smaller, quieter place to stand. The place a man found one afternoon, lying in a patch of sunlight, asking the most powerful man alive to simply step out of his light. Whether that's peace or something more complicated, wearing peace's face, that part is yours to decide.